Welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. Our guest today, Neil Cohen, back by popular demand. We're talking about getting a job, managing a career here in Silicon Valley. You're probably one of two flavors on this one. If you're of a certain age and a certain engineering talent, you probably find getting a job in Silicon Valley alarmingly easy. And I will say that is to your detriment, at least based on the way many people manage their careers, which is like a drunken monkey. I do want to caveat that. That's if monkeys drank and had careers. So before the monkeys start emailing me, I thought I would mention that. If you don't live in Silicon Valley, and I would say right now, if you look at what's going on in the planet, if you think the most interesting thing going on is the transformation of the world through technology, mobile technology, the place where that is happening, the capital city, is Silicon Valley. Maybe it's San Francisco, but it's not New York. It's not Silicon Prairie. This is it. This is Rome. This is King's Landing. It's a pretty exciting place to be, and it happens by being here. It happens by networking. So if you want to live here, if you want to work here, live here, get here. It's been that way for years in Hollywood. If you want to be in Hollywood, get there first. Don't send in your resume. Work as a waiter. Get discovered. Get to Silicon Valley. For those of you around the world. For the rest of you who find getting a job easy, we'll talk about managing a career. The big insight, of course, that you've heard on this podcast many times is that people way overestimate the probability of their company succeeding. I talked to a venture capitalist recently who had done one deal, one investment in the last 2 years. Now, he takes 10 meetings a day, 5 meetings a day. So think about that. Every week, he meets with 40 people, and all those 40 people go back to their partners. Oh, this guy, meeting went well. He's going to invest 40 a week, 40 a week, 40 a week. For a year, didn't invest in any of those. Once he does invest, the probability of that company succeeding is still, however many exits there are, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 5. So if you're working at your buddy's company and you don't have obvious traction, and you're the VP of engineering or whatever, your odds are pretty much the same as my odds of your company being successful. I don't own stock in your company. We're both going to make the same amount of money in your company. So we'll talk a little bit about what the tactics are if you're trying to maximize your wealth as a career move. We'll talk about that. Anyway, why listen to me when you can listen to Neil Cohen? This is the Something Ventured podcast. Our guest this time is Neil Cohen. All right, welcome. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today, Neil Cohen. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Welcome back. There's music now.
You
don't hear it now. Well, I hope you don't hear it.
Well, it's funny what I might be hearing now.
But if you're listening, you'll hear music. This is the Something Ventured podcast. Thanks for coming back. In this podcast, I explore the reality behind the headlines in Silicon Valley as I sit down with the people who are shaping the way we view the world online and beyond. Thanks for coming back.
I'm excited to be back, and we've got the official fuel of Silicon Valley.
We do. Phil's coffee. So welcome back. Thanks for doing this. Get a job. We're going to talk about getting a job in Silicon Valley. It should be interesting. You were telling me something before we started I thought we'd cover. I'm always intrigued by here in the Tale of Two Cities, San Francisco, like wealthy people.
Yes.
And I was asking, like, what if you're someone really rich, like, what happens? Like, do you call up the CEO of United Airlines? Like, I had a friend who's a doctor, and he once was on a flight and somebody passed away. And so they asked him, well, they didn't know it. They asked him to come take care of this guy. He's like, yeah, Mr. Jones is no longer with us. And he's like, look, I'll just sit with the guy. I'm a doctor. Who the hell cares? And then afterwards, somehow they're like, hey, thank you so much. And he got some number to somebody and got like sort of unlimited first class tickets for some period of time. Like something like, it was like that. Yeah. Like, so what goes on if you're like Mark Zuckerberg and you're trying to like, hey, tonight, I just want to go to that restaurant. Like it's sold out, but it doesn't apply to like how that happens just intrigues me.
Well, when we were talking, there are some people who embrace their privilege.
Do you know who I am?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
You hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And then there are some people who have a little bit of class about it. In some of my experience back when I used to work for large companies, like when I was a vice president at Hilton Hotels Corporation.
Yeah.
There you're in the hospitality business, and people were always looking for a room.
Yeah.
Millionaires, billionaires looking for a room. And, I was regaling you the story. Baron Hilton, who was running the company at that time, he had all these old time Hollywood friends.
Sure.
But back then I think it was a little different. It's like, I'll get you a room.
Right.
Not a problem. Buzz Aldrin, sure, I'll get you a room. Gene Cernan, get you a room, because these were his flying buddies and that kind of stuff. But I remember one time he comes up to me, he goes like, Neil, I want you to give Joe DiMaggio a call. He needs a room out in Hawaii. Here's his phone number. And there I am sitting with Joe DiMaggio's phone number, and to try to get him a free room like he needed one. But that's how it kind of worked.
That is just fabulous. I like it. Privilege and wealth here in Silicon Valley.
Oh, God.
All right. Getting a job in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
There's a lot here. If I knew then what I know now, I've done it. I mean, haven't interviewed for a job in 30 years, but
right. It's a new thing. And we got started talking about this because, for the first time in my life, I'm actually interviewing for a job. And anything I've ever done in my entire life, you tend to always go, people know you've got a track record of success or not. And then they say like, hey, come and join us, or you'd be perfect for this. And then you kind of look at what you're doing, or look whether this is the right move to go forward. And that's pretty much how I've managed my career, like most people have. Recently I found myself in a space where I said like, I don't know if I want to. I left my job last year voluntarily, and I said like, what, I'm going to go out and see if I can find something, a specific type of thing. And it's been an interesting experience because it's really the first time in my life I'm looking for a job.
This is relatively. This is interesting. Well, you'll decide if it's interesting. It's a podcast. You listen. You turn it off if it's not interesting. So pretty easy. But how talking to engineers, I was going to say young engineers, whatever engineers, how they it's relatively easy to get a job in Silicon Valley if you're an engineer.
Yes, it is.
And I was talking to a guy about how he thinks about his career, and he said, I forgot how he said it, but he basically said something like, "Look, I'm leaving XYZ company. It's not working out," which, by the way, that's how it always happens. And he's like, so the job I'm going to have next is whatever of the opportunities come my way, like in the next 2 weeks. Like I'm going to take the best of what happens in the next 2 weeks. And he did. It was some other company that, was like, nothing. And I think one of the themes is sort of like if you're a relatively young person, you kind of forget like the fullness of time, right? You're like, holy shit, if I don't get a job by the time I'm, 21.5 years old,
right? Well, and you've got a couple of things going on here too. There's, somebody, let's say like myself, who's been in the workforce for 35 years, and then you've got kind of starting out and then that kind of murky middle. And it also depends on what you're in. If you're a conscious engineer, you can pretty much get a job anywhere in the Silicon Valley, and it's interesting how they have the power and how they play that back.
Right.
But in a lot of other categories, for example, like marketing, sales, business development, it's not so much the same. People tend to be a little pickier, and they're. I've kind of used the term all the time. People are looking for unicorns, and because they don't really know what they want in all these different categories, and so it's really difficult to figure out how to play in that game. And like I teach at SF State, and one of the biggest topics when we kind of get into life issues is finding a job and what do you do and how do you do it, especially in Silicon Valley. And it's always comes back to me as the most interesting topic for the students.
Well, and so it's interesting. So there's two. I think the model has transitioned in Silicon Valley, for better, for worse, whatever. It used to be that you came to Silicon. It wasn't that great a job. Like being an engineer, working, even in the 80s, you were going to Wall Street, you were going to the consulting firms and all that.
Right.
And if you came to Silicon Valley, it was generally a passion. You were passionate. Oh my God, I just need to work on this, microchip or whatever the hell it is. Today, arguably, people are here to become wealthy. I mean, like, yeah, you're passionate about, delivering meals in 20 minutes or less. I doubt it. Like, you're just trying to become wealthy. The deck is actually incredibly stacked against you in Silicon Valley. And the game, venture capitalist told me this once. He's like, look, Silicon Valley is built for founders, basically. And so what happens is you go to these jobs and you get paid less than you normally would because you have stock options.
Yep.
It's kind of crappy. Like when you travel, you don't really fly first class, whatever. And then like maybe if you're lucky, every 4 years, you get, some options become worth something and they're worth like $200,000, which is a lot of money. But that was going to be your yearly bonus anyway if you just stayed at McKinsey, right? But you've got this fantasy that there's some probability that you're going to go work at Facebook and you're going to be worth like $92 million.
Right.
And the reality is you're not. Like statistically, you're not. Like today in Silicon Valley, 300 companies were started. If you picked one of those 300 companies today, you could have picked one of 300 tomorrow, one of 300, like all the way down the line. So one of the things that's going on in Silicon Valley is it's driven by a relatively cheap labor pool. And, no one's sewing soccer balls and getting paid $3 an hour. But it's driven by a relatively cheap labor pool that's working for a fantasy that actually does happen, but happens to far fewer people than understand that it happens.
Well, and everybody's playing to the exception and not the rule. And they all think that they have the power to kind of change that, which is wonderful. To think that I can go in and I can make this company more successful or be successful and we'll have that dream that the other people won't.
Yeah.
But it definitely, so when you're looking for work, for example, you're competing in that environment as well. For somebody, let's say, who's been around for a while and knows that game, trying to pick a winner. Trying to look at the assortment of, let's say, for me, head of marketing jobs of 40 companies that are out there and saying, okay, where am I going to even spend my time knowing that the chance for it going public or having an acquisition are one in a couple of hundred? And so your criteria actually becomes different because my criteria has nothing to do with an exit strategy. Right. My criteria has to do with, am I going to like the people? Do I believe in the product? Do I think I can make a difference and have some fun doing it? Like how am I going to spend my time? Which is valuable to me, right? And enjoy myself versus make $10 million or $100 million. Now, if I end up making that kind of money, it's not like I'm going to, give it all away. I mean, you want to be successful, but it's a different concept of people who are coming in, fresh to the region or right out of college or still under 30 because they're all chasing the Silicon Valley dream versus the traditional American dream.
Well, so here's the odds. If you're working at a venture-backed company, so I don't know, there's 1,000 companies and one of them is lucky enough to get venture-backed. So if you're working for that 1 in 1,000 company, there's like a 1 in 10 chance that company is going to work.
Yes.
So put a gun to your head with 9 bullets in it and, one empty chamber. Like, how are you feeling? Like, that's right. I know that's not how guns work, but that's roughly what's going on. 5 bullets, 1 empty chamber. Yeah, good luck with that. But you're the VP. Like, if you're sitting down with your buddy and your buddy's like, I got an idea and I want you to come be my, technical co-founder, your odds are actually 0. Like, mathematically, they're not. There's whatever's right next to 0, that number. Like that's actually your odds, and yet people want to be like the CMO of this and blah 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 of that. The wealth maximizing. There's 2 wealth maximizing strategies that actually work in Silicon Valley. One is to just go get a job that pays you a lot of money and invest in startups. Like invest in 30 of them, and one of them will be Uber. So if you wanted to replicate that strategy by actually working there, you'd have to work at each company for 2 years. It would take you 60 years. Good luck. So that's one strategy. The other strategy that I've seen to be the most effective, and the guys who are hanging out and, investing and taking 3-month vacations every 4 months, basically took the shittiest job they could get at a company that was pretty much a sure winner.
Right.
That is, they took the assistant general counsel job at Facebook, and they're not in the board meetings, and they're not the CFO, but they're at Facebook for 4 years, or Uber, or whatever it is. in a shitty job. Not a shitty, I shouldn't say it, but not a amazing, you're not one of the top execs. And then they take their reputation. I've worked at Facebook. Then they take that over and they work at Twitter. And they take that reputation. They work at Uber. And they've strung together 4 or 5 assistant controller positions. They're not the co-founder of anything. And they're worth $92 million.
Yep.
Essentially. I mean, that model works in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Like that is the working model. So the other way to also organize your time, I was talking to one of the early employees at Facebook. He was like number 5. And he basically said, look, the way you organize your life if you're a young engineer is you say, I'm going to have, by the time I'm 30, I'm going to have 7 hops of 2-year jobs.
Right. And taking the long view of knowing that. But that's another thing that's changed so dramatically, let's say, and again, me being around in the workforce for a long time.
Yeah.
And we all know that work model has changed, which is you used to work for a company, you'd be there for 15, 20, 25 years, and you didn't go from job to job to job to job, which is the strategy in kind of Northern California, which doesn't necessarily play well in other parts of the country. And still, this is what I find interesting, you will still have recruiters, an executive search, and by the way, you're going to start me on a rant here, who look at your background and goes like, wow, it looks like you've jumped around a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, have you been in Silicon Valley for longer than a year? Because obviously you don't know how it works.
Yeah. Well, and that is an issue. I mean, you also don't want to have, people go through phases where their resume just becomes kind of shrapnel. Like it's a lot of stuff that you've never heard of. You're here for 2 years, you're here for 2 years. You got a reason for every one of them that's pretty good. But if you're so let's take the point of view of a recruiter, right? Recruiter gets hired by hot new company Uber to hire an executive, right? Mm-hmm. And they're putting a slate of people in front of the executives at Uber, and they need to get somebody through, and then they're going to get paid $150,000 for hiring the person. You can go through and explain this guy who worked here and here and here and here and here and why he left each one and what he learned at each one. But it's a lot easier to go, this guy was the head of mobile at Facebook. And then that's something that everybody can say to each other. They can nod at each other, go head of mobile at Facebook. Now, if you were at Facebook or Twitter or Google in the last 10 years, 5 years, you probably didn't really do anything. Like you didn't start Facebook. You showed up. Google was a money machine. You get this all the time. Google, oh my God, I invented AdSense. I've met 50 people who have invented AdSense.
Right.
It's amazing.
It's like being in the advertising industry and you just sound like I did the 1984 ad, but nobody's around that did it, so you can take the claim.
And you're probably not the best candidate. Like you probably showed up. You were in Vector 17 of like, the subsystem working on the security subsystem. Like you're probably not that good at building something new compared to the guy who tried to build something and failed. But that narrative is so easy for a recruiter to say that there's something to, like, go be the head of mobile, go be the head of mobile at Yahoo or something like that. And it just cleans up your resume real nicely. So there is that shrapnel effect where it's like 10 companies where you kind of heard of them. You don't really know. If you're an engineer, it doesn't matter because someone will hire you. But in building an arc of a career, spending some time at a shittier job at a Facebook or an Uber or something that people have heard of isn't the worst strategy ever.
Well, one of the things when I'm coaching students at SF State, and I tell them all the time, sometimes, go backwards to go forwards. Mm-hmm. And that taking a job that provides the best opportunity to build some experience, to build some reputation, to work with some good people is a much better opportunity. And I tell them, the money on face value is always so attractive, especially to people coming in new to the workforce.
Right.
And the difference between making $50,000 a year and $40,000 a year to some of them is like a big deal.
Right.
Especially when you're starting off. And trying to get them off of that shiny object of dollars versus opportunity. Yeah. And, is there a mentor there for you? What's going to be your day-to-day job experience? Yep. What are you going to get to work on? I'll give a perfect example. When I was working in my last job, we had a young woman who was just graduating from San Francisco State, and she was marketing student of the year.
Yep.
And by the way, here's some great strategies that she deployed that I tell people about all the time. She was following like 10 or 15 companies that she was interested in while she was in school. She's following them on Twitter. She's following them on LinkedIn. She's following the people.
Yeah.
And when she sees stuff that she likes that they're talking about, she retweets, she comments, so kind of like digital flirting in a way that just says like, boy, I find you and your company interesting and that type of thing. Well, this company that I was working with, and I knew her from the school, had a position opened. And when she sent her resume in, everybody at the company knew who the hell she was because she had been retweeting stuff and had showed some interest.
Yeah.
And when she eventually decided she was going to take the job because we offered it to her, she had friends who were making 10, 15, 20,000 a year more at bigger companies and stuff like that. But what did she get to do? She got to do the social strategy. She got to do the channel strategy. She got to learn how to use Marketo and do marketing automation. She got to do events. She got to do webinars while her friends were basically doing one or two things.
Yeah.
And so now if she goes out on the market, she's worth 3x what she was when she came in, starting at what she started at. And she's only had 2.5, 3 years of experience.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that, going to your, it's like, what's the long, what's the long game? Like, what are the tools and things that I'm going to need to kind of get ahead?
Yeah.
And when you look at her compared to, let's say, her peers, who still have done rudimentary marketing automation or haven't actually, or have just stayed in one aspect of the marketing mix.
Yeah.
She could be their boss.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, so here's a story about that. And I think there's a message here, which is like, jump in and get engaged. Jump in. There's serendipity in Silicon Valley. It's a network community concept. I think if you look at Wall Street, it's more of a, that Goldman Sachs is the winner. You know which hedge funds are the winner. You don't really network your way around to kind of figure out what's next, right? Like Goldman Sachs is next, right? They won. Like they're going to be winning forever. If you do well at Goldman Sachs, you'll get paid $10 million a year. But the number of people that we interview who show up, I work at Nuzzle. It's a news site, social news. The number of people who show up and they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't really get a chance to look at your website.
Yeah.
Like, listen, dipshit. So now I got to sit there for 28 more minutes to pretend like I'm interested in anything about them because I'm not.
Right.
Even if you've looked at our website, we still generally go look at the database to figure out if you've been using our app. And if you come in and you say, I've been using your app, I really like it, I don't like this, kind of thoughtful, you're in the game.
Have a perspective, yes.
We're not going to hire you, but you're in the game. If you even looked at our website, you're not in the game. The billionaire, I can't remember his name, but this is a great story. This guy's a billionaire. He was kind of the CEO of Uber for a second, and then for a little while, and then Travis stepped back in to be CEO, but this guy stuck it out smartly as part of the executive team, and is literally worth $1 billion. A few years ago, unemployed, this guy tries to get a job in business development at Foursquare, which is the check-in site. Does not get a job.
Right.
Proceeds to go out in Manhattan night after night and sign up businesses for Foursquare. Tells them how great Foursquare is, tells them to get on board, and shares this all with the company. He's like, look, I signed up another restaurant. Well, of course they hired him, right? A few years, of the thousands of people who wanted a BD job at Foursquare, he's the one guy who actually just went out and showed them he could sign up a couple businesses.
Well, and you'd think that this is common sense, which is knowing and understanding the business. So things like just following them and tweeting them and that type of stuff. And again, and I'm talking about this from new, this sense of, hey, here I am. I call it the open job, warm body theory of job search, which is, here I am, enthusiastic and alive. You've got an open job. I'm perfect for this. Versus, this is the category I want. This is the company I want, and here's why, and here's why I'm interested.
Yeah.
And people just don't prepare that way, which actually makes it easier for the people who do prepare that way. But it's still few and far between. I'm often surprised at the experience that you had, because I had that at my last job too, where I would talk to salespeople and they would, one of the things they say, well, so tell me what you guys are doing. And I actually told a guy once, well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
If you're really interested in this job, let's end the interview now. You go do some research and then send me an email when you're ready to talk again.
Yeah.
And I never heard from the
That's
guy
a good
again.
time saver. I mean, for us, we'll like literally just take a look to see. We know if you've been using the product, like we have we've got that information. If not, we're probably not gonna have a chat with you.
But how many people, and this is because, this is one of the things we were talking about before we decided to do this podcast, which is how many people do you actually talk to that reply over the transom through a website, through a Craigslist or an Indeed ad? So you do some, so you are searching that way.
Yeah. If somebody like if we're looking for like an Android developer and somebody with an Android development background approaches us. AngelList has become a big source of recruiting for us. Approaches us and says, hey, I love your product. I'd like to be involved and join you guys. We'll talk to them. But there's not at least for us, there's not like millions of people approaching us. There's all kinds of people approaching us who are like, clearly have a skill set we're not looking for. Right. Like I'm a sales analytics person, and they've clearly just spammed 1,000 different companies.
Yeah, so you are getting that. So you're getting like a lot of stuff coming through. So you've got to sort through because the wheat from the chaff. And
but if it's a relatively thoughtful person who's reached out to us, I'm also not of the group who's like just too cool for everybody. People are looking for jobs. It's hard to find a job. Be a little bit respectful, right? We're in that game. You want to be employed. We want to employ you. We're not like, oh, we're too cool. We're overwhelmed by this, that, or the other thing. We're trying to hire people.
That's good that you're doing it. And one of the things that I've heard a lot of, and this isn't just my experience, but I've talked to a lot of people who are kind of out there kicking around and looking, is this, with all this automation, software as a service, filtering, technology on the HR recruiting side.
Yeah.
The complete lack of humanity. It's like suck the humanness out of the process, and some of the cruelty, that you hear, on a day-to-day basis. The stories that I can tell about friends that I've known that have, for example, been reached out by a recruiter. Yeah. And they said, we love your background. We think you're terrific.
Right.
They set up an interview with the hiring manager, and they have that interview. And then never again do you hear from that person or the company. And, how does that lack of common courtesy or a letter, actual true story, the flush letter that you get back, when you send in a resume that says, maybe you didn't read the job description carefully enough. The letter actually said you didn't read the letter carefully and the job description carefully enough. Maybe you should go back and check that out.
Right.
For a job that this person was perfectly aligned with their background in the job. So I'm sure that was the standard flush letter. But how dare you? Go ahead and tell me you don't want me, but don't tell me that I can't read. Yeah. To showing up for interviews 15 minutes late. And again, this is the recruiter or the internal recruiter or the search consultant or the person or canceling it 15 minutes after it was supposed to start. Just bad human behavior. And how is that acceptable? Yeah. On the job recruitment side? It's like, is life so good? Yeah. That you have to throw out basic human kindness. Yeah. And it's been shocking to me. I've experienced it a little bit, but I've heard this more firsthand from people where they just show you the stuff and you go you've got to be kidding. Yeah.
Yeah. On the flip side, I interviewed some candidates where incredible. I interviewed somebody a week ago and they were kind of they'd studied computer science, but they wanted to get a PhD or something in something. Right. But then first they wanted to go to Guatemala because help them. Because apparently people in Guatemala have no idea how to dig a well, which I'm a little skeptical about. I was like, well, sounds like you got some shit to work out before you're ready to start working.
Right.
Like, we're really not looking for Guatemala well helper PhD people. We need people who can write a certain kind of code. So, like, you're just too fancy for us. Like,
but at least you talk to the person and gave them some feedback versus
call us when you're ready to work.
Yeah, call us when you're ready to work. But that's the kind of thing. I mean, there's no substitute for better preparation on the job seeker side, which is knowing about the company, understanding the company, looking at, the basic 101, and then you can go deeper than that.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, people should remember when they were looking for work. And be a little bit more empathetic, and at the very least, be on time for meetings. If you're going to cancel, don't do it at the time that the meeting starts. If you're going to if you're going to be proactive and reach out to somebody, at least be kind enough to close the loop and say, hey, that you're not what we were looking for, but thanks for spending some time with us.
Yeah,
because people get their hopes up. It's just cruel.
In my experience, I haven't found that to be much of a problem. I mean, I find most companies to be pretty well run. Like, HR doesn't keep people waiting in a room for a long time. If somebody flakes and you accidentally left someone in a room for half an hour, somebody comes in like, holy shit, we didn't mean to do that.
Right.
Like, in my experience, there are some violations, but I haven't. Like, I see a lot of companies that try to do. Like, if somebody's late here and someone's sitting in a boardroom, we're like, shit, here's what happened. If you need to go home,
come back.
Yeah,
like but again, this is recent for me. This is what kind of astounded me about some of the process. I actually had happened to me recently at a company I was interested in. I came back, spent one of the full day rounds of interviews with people, one of those things.
Yeah.
I'm one of the 2 finalists. And then 3.5 weeks later, when they said they were going to get back to me the next Monday, I'm still waiting to hear.
Yeah.
And you're going like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And it's not like I didn't reach out once or twice, but you like radio silence.
Yeah.
And my response to that was I sent them a note and I said like, hey, thanks for your consideration, but
but that's it. Like, you're done. Like, pretty easy.
But you're done. And I no hard feelings, but how could you spend a day with somebody? They tell you you're 1 or 2 candidates and then never hear back from them.
Yeah.
And so you go like, wow, how can you do that?
Yeah.
But you don't want to work at a company like that. Like, I personally wouldn't want to work. If that's their culture, maybe it was just their culture towards me. Yeah. But if that's their culture, then you have to think twice about if that's where you want to spend your time and spin your wheels.
On the earlier side now, most people don't send rejection letters or things like if you send something over the transom to us, we don't send you to most companies. They don't send you a rejection. They're like, we're not. They just don't respond. And if you can't figure out what that means, like, it means they're just not interested at this time. Which doesn't mean you can't network your way in. In any case,
but that is the way to do it, though, and and that leads to the next topic, which is, when I look at my experience right now, almost every meaningful interview I've had, and I haven't had a lot of them because it's not every company you want to work for.
Yeah.
Every meaningful conversation I've had has come through a personal contact.
Sure.
And you say sure, but like everybody goes like, well, how does that happen?
Yeah.
I was like, and it's some of the, the tools that are available to every job seeker today, if you want to be selective, is amazing because you can, obviously go into look at LinkedIn and see who knows who and all that type of stuff, and never apply through the website.
Yeah.
It's always coming in, through the site. And I think everybody who's listening right now is like going like, well, of course.